I grew up in a family where Thanksgiving was sacred. Every year we would gather at my parents' house, share stories, and enjoy Mom's famous apple pie. Family meant everything to us. That is until my brother Jackson's girlfriend Tiffany showed up last Thanksgiving and turned our peaceful tradition into a complete disaster. This year I made the difficult decision to exclude her from our gathering. Now everyone is calling me the bad guy, and my own brother refuses to speak to me. Before I dive into what happened, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to make a tough call to protect your family traditions. Now let me tell you how it all went down. My name is Hans, 34 years old, born and raised in Michigan. Our family has always been tight-knit, the kind where Sunday dinners are mandatory and holiday traditions are followed to the letter. My parents, Margaret and William, have hosted Thanksgiving at their colonial-style house for as long as I can remember. The preparations would start weeks in advance, Mom polishing her grandmother's silver, Dad cleaning his carving knives, and the rest of us pitching in wherever needed. My younger brother Jackson is 29 and has always been what you might call the wild child of the family. While I followed the straight and narrow path, college stable job as an architect, marriage to my high school sweetheart Abigail by 26, and our two amazing kids, Emma and Liam, who are 7 and 5, Jackson took the scenic route through life. 3 different college majors, a string of odd jobs across 4 states, and a rotating cast of girlfriends that never seemed to stick around longer than a season. Despite our different lifestyles, we have always been close. I looked out for him, and he brought excitement into my somewhat predictable life. Our parents never played favorites, but I naturally fell into the role of the responsible one, the family mediator who helped keep the peace during disagreements. My grandmother Elaine, 78, and sharp as a tack, has been the keeper of our family traditions. She taught Mom how to make her famous sweet potato casserole with the perfect marshmallow crust. She established the ritual of everyone sharing what they are thankful for before we eat. And she started the tradition of making ornaments after dinner for the upcoming Christmas season. Our Thanksgiving celebrations followed a comfortable, predictable pattern. Everyone would arrive around 11 in the morning. The men would watch football while the women finalized dinner preparations. Yes, somewhat old-fashioned, but it worked for us. The kids would play in the basement rumpus room that Dad had set up with toys and games. At 2 o'clock sharp, we would all gather around the extended dining table, hold hands for grace, and then feast until we could barely move. After dinner, we would move to the living room for coffee and dessert, share family stories, look through old photo albums, and then make those Christmas ornaments with materials grandmother prepared. Simple, maybe even boring to outsiders, but it was our tradition, our connection to each other, and our past. Last year, Jackson called 2 weeks before Thanksgiving with news. He was bringing his new girlfriend, Tiffany. This was unusual enough, as he rarely brought dates to family gatherings. He described her as really special and someone who could be around for a while. Naturally, we were all excited to meet her. My wife Abigail even prepared a special welcome basket with homemade soaps and candles, her way of making newcomers feel included. I remember feeling genuinely optimistic. Jackson seemed happier than he had in years. Maybe he was finally finding his footing both professionally and personally. We had met a few of his previous girlfriends. There was the aspiring actress who moved to Los Angeles after 3 months, the yoga instructor who decided to find herself in Thailand, and the bartender who Jackson admitted he had nothing in common with beyond their mutual love of craft beer. None had made it to a family Thanksgiving. The fact that he was bringing Tiffany seemed significant, a sign that perhaps my brother was growing up. How wrong I was. Thanksgiving Day started like any other. Abigail and I packed up the car with the kids, their overnight bags for staying at Grandma's, and the 3 side dishes we were responsible for bringing. We arrived at my parents' house around 10:30, earlier than the official start time, to help with final preparations. Grandmother Elaine was already there, directing operations from her preferred armchair in the kitchen, while Mom flitted about checking everything twice. Jackson and Tiffany were scheduled to arrive at 11, but by noon there was still no sign of them. This was not entirely surprising. Jackson had never been known for his punctuality. Dad and I were watching the Detroit Lions game. The kids were playing downstairs, and the women were chatting in the kitchen when we finally heard the doorbell at 12:45. My first impression of Tiffany was that she was strikingly beautiful. Tall, blonde designer clothes, perfect makeup. She looked like she had just stepped off an Instagram page rather than driven 3 hours from Chicago where she and Jackson lived. But there was something in her expression, a slight curl of her lip, as she surveyed our modest family home that gave me pause. "Sorry we're late," Jackson said, giving Mom a hug. "Traffic was a nightmare. Plus, the Airbnb we booked was like super gross," Tiffany added, scrolling through her phone. "We had to stop and find a hotel instead." I told Jackson I was not staying somewhere with polyester sheets. That was the first red flag. My parents had specifically offered their guest room to Jackson and Tiffany, but he had declined, saying they would find their own accommodations. Now I understood why. Introductions were made all around, with Tiffany offering limp handshakes and barely making eye contact. When my 5-year-old son Liam shyly offered to show her his new toy truck, she smiled tightly and said, "Maybe later, kiddo. Grown-ups are talking." I exchanged glances with Abigail, who raised her eyebrows slightly. But we were determined to make this work for Jackson's sake. Things went from awkward to problematic when we moved to the kitchen. My mother had everything timed perfectly, as always. Tiffany, however, seemed intent on disrupting the flow. "Oh, you're using canned cranberry sauce," she commented, wrinkling her nose. "I always make mine from fresh berries with orange zest and a splash of Grand Marnier." My mother, ever gracious, smiled and said, "That sounds lovely, dear. Perhaps you could make that next time." "And what is that?" "Interesting-looking casserole." Tiffany pointed to my grandmother's signature sweet potato dish. "That's Grandma Elaine's sweet potato casserole," I explained. "It's been a family tradition for over 50 years. Marshmallows on vegetables." "That's so quaint." Tiffany laughed. "I'm actually more of a savory person myself. I brought something that might add a little sophistication to the meal." She disappeared to the car and returned with a glass container. "It's a truffle and mushroom risotto. I learned the recipe during my culinary tour of northern Italy last year." My mother looked concerned. "Oh, that's very thoughtful, but we already have all the side dishes planned. And Liam has a severe mushroom allergy, so we're usually very careful about." "It's just a small amount of mushroom," Tiffany interrupted. "I'm sure it will be fine. Besides, kids need to develop their palates beyond chicken nuggets and hot dogs." I felt a flash of anger at her dismissal of Liam's medical condition, but bit my tongue. Jackson stood by, looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. Throughout the afternoon, Tiffany continued her campaign of disruption. During the football game, she loudly commented on how mindless sports were. When my grandmother began telling her traditional Thanksgiving story about meeting my grandfather during the Korean War, Tiffany interrupted repeatedly to check her phone and take selfies. "Does anyone want to be in my Instagram story?" she asked completely, talking over my grandmother. "Jackson, come here. Let's show everyone our Thanksgiving with the future in-laws." By the time we sat down for dinner, the tension in the room was palpable. My father said grace, during which Tiffany texted audibly. As dishes were passed around, she made a show of taking minimal portions of most items, while placing her risotto prominently on the table. "Everyone must try this," she insisted. "It's literally to die for." Despite my warnings, some of the risotto made its way onto Liam's plate. He took one bite, and within minutes was developing hives around his mouth. 10 minutes later, he was having difficulty breathing. "He's having an allergic reaction," Abigail said, panic rising in her voice. "Where's his EpiPen?" What followed was chaos. We administered Liam's EpiPen while my father called 911. Abigail and I ended up spending 3 hours in the emergency room with a terrified 5-year-old, while the rest of the family's Thanksgiving dinner grew cold. When we finally returned, exhausted and shaken, we found the dinner mostly cleared away and an atmosphere thick with tension. Tiffany was on the couch, drinking heavily from a wine glass that kept being mysteriously refilled. "Oh, good. The crisis is averted," she said with artificial brightness. "I still think it's all a bit of an overreaction. My friend's kid had a gluten thing and she just grew out of it." I had to physically restrain Abigail from responding. My sweet, patient wife was ready to launch herself across the room. The evening deteriorated further when Tiffany, now visibly intoxicated, began critiquing Abigail's pumpkin pie. "The crust is so heavy," she slurred. "You really should use European butter, it makes all the difference. And is this filling from a can? I can always tell." Abigail, who had spent hours making that pie from scratch with pumpkins we had grown in our own garden, went silent. The final straw came during the ornament making tradition. My grandmother had prepared all the materials: pine cones, ribbons, glitter, and her special ornament hooks that had been passed down from her own mother. "This is what you do for fun," Tiffany laughed loudly. "No wonder Jackson was so eager to leave this town. This is something they make kindergartners do to keep them busy." She then proceeded to spill her red wine all over my grandmother's antique lace tablecloth, a wedding gift from 1962. "Oops," she giggled. "Guess traditions are meant to be broken, right?" My grandmother's face crumpled, though she tried to hide it. Jackson, finally noticing the damage being done, suggested they should leave. "Yeah, this has been super fun, but we should get back to our hotel," Tiffany said, making no effort to help clean up her mess. "The bar there has an amazing cocktail menu." After they left, no one knew quite what to say. My mother tried to salvage the evening, but the damage was done. Thanksgiving, our sacred family tradition, had been ruined. Later that night, after putting the kids to bed in my old room at my parents' house, I found my grandmother sitting alone in the kitchen, carefully blotting the wine stain on her tablecloth with club soda. "I don't think that girl loves our Jackson," she said simply. "Not in the way he deserves to be loved." I could only nod in agreement. The weeks after Thanksgiving were quiet. Jackson called to check on Liam, expressed generic regret about how things went, but offered no real apology for Tiffany's behavior. When I tried to discuss it with him, he became defensive. "Tiffany is just more sophisticated than what you're used to," he said. "She comes from a different world. Her family spends Thanksgiving at 5-star resorts." "That doesn't excuse ruining grandmother's tablecloth or nearly sending my son to the hospital," I replied. "The tablecloth was an accident, and she didn't know about Liam's allergy being that serious," he countered, though we had explicitly mentioned it. The conversation ended unresolved, as did several others over the following months. My parents, ever the peacekeepers, advised me to let it go. "Jackson seems happy," my mother said during a Sunday visit in February. "And maybe Tiffany was just nervous meeting everyone. First impressions can be difficult." But as the year progressed, more troubling information emerged. Jackson and Tiffany's relationship appeared volatile, dramatic breakups followed by passionate reconciliations. During one of their off periods in June, Jackson stayed with us for a week and revealed that Tiffany had maxed out his credit cards and was pressuring him to buy her an engagement ring worth 3 months of his salary. "But she's the most exciting person I've ever met," he justified. "When things are good between us, they're amazing." By August, they were back together, and Jackson's social media became a highlight reel of their apparently perfect relationship. Expensive restaurants, weekend getaways, and professionally photographed couple portraits. Meanwhile, my grandmother's health had begun to decline. Nothing serious, but at 78, the stress of family conflict was taking its toll. During a private conversation while I was helping her with grocery shopping, she confessed her concerns. "That girl reminds me of your grandfather's sister's husband," she said. "Charming when he needed something, cruel when he didn't. They divorced after he emptied their bank account and disappeared. I worry history is repeating itself." At home, my children occasionally asked uncomfortable questions. During a family movie night in July, Emma looked up from her popcorn and asked, "Is the mean lady coming back for Thanksgiving this year?" "Why would you call her that?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "She made Liam sick and made great-grandma cry," Emma replied with the straightforward logic of a 7-year-old. "And she said my turkey handprint was stupid." Abigail and I had several late-night conversations about the situation. While she was furious about Tiffany's behavior, she also worried about creating a permanent rift with Jackson. "Family is everything to you, Hans," she reminded me. "If you cut Tiffany out, you might lose your brother, too." By early October, Thanksgiving planning had begun in earnest. My mother called to discuss the menu, dancing around the elephant in the room until finally asking, Should we set a place for Tiffany this year? I took a deep breath. Mom, I don't think that's a good idea. After what happened last year. She's still with Jackson, my mother pointed out. They got back together last month after that awful fight at Cousin Beth's wedding. I hadn't even heard about that incident, which only strengthened my resolve. After discussing it further with Abigail, I decided to talk to Jackson directly. I met him for coffee at a neutral location, a diner halfway between our homes. He looked tired with dark circles under his eyes and a nervousness that hadn't been there before Tiffany. I need to talk to you about Thanksgiving, I began carefully. Let me guess, he said defensively. You're going to try to control who I bring, right? Jackson last year was a disaster. Liam ended up in the emergency room. Grandmother's tablecloth was ruined. Mom's dinner was wasted. And not once did Tiffany apologize or even acknowledge what she did. That's ancient history, Hans. Tiffany has grown a lot since then. Has she? Because from what I've heard about Beth's wedding, Jackson's face darkened. Who told you about that? It wasn't a big deal. Tiffany just had a few too many champagnes and thought the best man was flirting with her. So she didn't throw a centerpiece at him and call Beth's mother a boring suburban housewife. You weren't there. You don't understand the context. I sighed deeply. Look, I love you. You're my brother. But I need to protect my kids, our parents, and especially grandmother. I don't think Tiffany should come this year. The explosion I had been expecting finally came. You've always thought you were better than me, Mr. Perfect, with his perfect wife and perfect kids and perfect house. Well, guess what? Tiffany loves me for who I am, not who she wants me to be. Is that why she's been trying to change everything about you? Your clothes, your friends, even the way you talk. If I'm not welcome with my girlfriend, then I'm not coming either. Jackson declared, standing up so abruptly his chair nearly fell over. Have fun with your precious traditions without me. He stormed out, leaving me with the check and a heavy heart. When the news spread through the family, opinions were divided. My father thought I was being too harsh. My mother was torn between wanting everyone present and fearing another disaster. My sister-in-law, Beth, still stinging from her ruined wedding reception, vocally supported my decision. Grandmother Elaine called me privately. You did the right thing, Hans, she said quietly. Sometimes love means setting boundaries. Your grandfather had to do the same with his brother when alcohol became a problem. It hurts, but it's necessary. Despite her support, I was plagued with doubt. Had I overreacted? Was I destroying our family over one bad Thanksgiving? The following weeks were filled with second-guessing and sleepless nights. Then, the social media campaign began. It started with a vague post from Jackson amazing how family first only applies when it's convenient. Number. Disappointed. Number. Family drama. 2 days later, Tiffany escalated with her own post. Funny how some people claim to be family-oriented, but practice exclusion and judgment. Not looking forward to spending another holiday with toxic in-laws anyway. Number. Blessed number, better off separate. These cryptic messages might have remained contained, but Tiffany took things further. She began direct messaging extended family members. Cousins, aunts, uncles. People who weren't familiar with the full story. My phone started blowing up with texts and calls. Cousin Michael wanted to know why I was being an uptight jerk. Aunt Patricia reminded me that family means accepting people's flaws. Uncle Steve suggested I needed to let go of controlling everything. None of them had been at last Thanksgiving. None of them knew what had actually happened. The situation exploded when a mutual friend forwarded me screenshots from Tiffany's private Instagram story. There, she had constructed an entirely different narrative, claiming that my family had subjected her to classist microaggressions and outdated gender expectations. She described Liam's allergic reaction as a minor rash that we had dramatically overreacted to in order to make her feel unwelcome. Most shocking was her characterization of my grandmother as a controlling old hag stuck in the 1950 seconds who can't accept that women have choices now. I was livid. This deliberate misrepresentation crossed a line. But before I could decide how to address it, the situation escalated even further. 3 days before Thanksgiving, I received a frantic call from my mother. Jackson and Tiffany had shown up unannounced at my parents' house, ostensibly to clear the air, but clearly there to force a confrontation. "Your brother is insisting that either Tiffany is welcome on Thursday, or he's never coming to another family gathering," my mother explained, her voice tight with stress. "Dad is trying to calm everyone down, but it's getting heated. Can you come over?" By the time Abigail and I arrived, thankfully we had left the kids with a neighbor, the situation had deteriorated into a full-blown screaming match. Tiffany was standing in my parents' living room, tears streaming down her face as she accused my family of never giving her a chance. Jackson was red-faced, alternating between defending her and berating my father for taking Han's side. Most distressingly, my grandmother was sitting in her chair, ashen-faced, her hand pressed against her chest in a way that immediately alarmed me. "Enough," I shouted, moving immediately to my grandmother's side and checking her pulse. "Everyone needs to calm down. Grandma, are you okay?" "I'm fine, dear," she said, though her voice was faint, just a little overwhelmed. Tiffany, however, saw my concern as an opportunity. "Oh, now you're going to accuse me of harming your grandmother, too. Is there anything you won't blame me for?" "This isn't about blame," I said firmly, helping my grandmother take a sip of water. "This is about the fact that you've created chaos in our family, shown no respect for our traditions, endangered my son with your disregard for his medical needs, and now you're manipulating the situation with lies on social media." "Lies. You want to talk about lies?" Tiffany's voice rose to a near screech. "Your whole family is built on lies and pretending to be perfect." "We never claimed to be perfect," my mother interjected. "But we do value respect and consideration." "Respect? You never respected me or my relationship with Jackson. You never wanted me to be part of this family." "That's not true," my father said wearily. "We welcomed you last Thanksgiving despite everything that happened." "You mean despite the fact that I dared to bring a sophisticated dish to your processed food nightmare, despite the fact that I accidentally spilled wine, despite the fact that your grandson probably isn't even really allergic to mushrooms?" The room fell silent at this last statement. Even Jackson looked shocked. "What did you just say?" I asked quietly, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. I just meant that kids often pretend to have allergies for attention." Tiffany backpedaled, suddenly aware she had crossed a line. "You know what, Tiffany? I have tried very hard to be understanding. I have tried to see this from your perspective. But I draw the line at you suggesting my 5-year-old son faked anaphylactic shock and a trip to the emergency room." Something in my tone must have finally gotten through to Jackson. He was looking at Tiffany with new eyes, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "Tiff," he said slowly, "you told me you didn't know his allergy was serious." "I didn't," she protested. "But you just implied you didn't believe he had an allergy at all," Jackson continued, his brow furrowed in confusion. "That's not what I meant." "Then what about what you said on Instagram about my grandmother?" I pressed, seeing an opening, calling her a controlling old hag. "I never said that," Tiffany insisted. I pulled out my phone and showed the screenshots to everyone in the room. My mother gasped. My father's face hardened. Jackson looked stricken. "And what about telling everyone that Liam only had a minor rash?" I continued. "Or that we dramatically overreacted to his emergency room visit?" "You're twisting my words," Tiffany insisted, but her voice had lost its conviction. The most surprising development came next. My quiet, gentle grandmother slowly rose to her feet, drawing herself up to her full 5'2" and fixed Tiffany with a steady gaze. "Young lady," she said calmly, "in my 78 years I have learned that character reveals itself in how we treat others when we think no one is looking. You have shown your character quite clearly. I think it would be best if you left now." For once, Tiffany was speechless. Even more shocking, Jackson nodded in agreement. "I think that's a good idea," he said quietly. "Tiff, let's go." As they headed for the door, Tiffany made one last desperate attempt to maintain control. Fine. But there's something you should all know. I'm pregnant. That's right. I'm carrying the next generation of this precious family. So you'd better decide how you want to treat me going forward. Jackson stopped dead in his tracks. What? Since when I was waiting for the right moment to tell you, she said suddenly, all vulnerability and wide eyes. But we haven't. Jackson began then, stopped awareness dawning on his face. We haven't been together that way in over 2 months, not since our last breakup. The look of panic that flashed across Tiffany's face told us everything we needed to know. Get out, Jackson said, his voice breaking. Just get out. After they left, separately with Tiffany calling an Uber, we all sat in stunned silence. My grandmother's color had returned, and she patted my hand reassuringly. Sometimes the rot needs to be exposed before healing can begin, she said softly. The following days were difficult but clarifying. Jackson called me the next morning and asked if we could talk. We met at the same diner, but this time, instead of anger, my brother was filled with remorse and confusion. I don't know what happened to me, Hans, he confessed, staring into his untouched coffee. It's like I was under a spell or something. Every time I tried to stand up to her or question something, she would either explode in anger or break down crying. I started doubting my own memory of events. That's called gaslighting Jackson. It's a form of emotional manipulation. She was so different when we first met. Fun, exciting, full of plans for our future. Then slowly everything became about her. Her needs, her feelings, her preferences. I started losing touch with friends. I changed how I dressed, what I watched, even how I spoke. And whenever I tried to reconnect with any of you, there would be some crisis that prevented it. I reached across the table and squeezed his shoulder. That's what happens in toxic relationships. They isolate you from the people who truly care about you. Jackson broke down, then crying openly in the middle of the diner. I've made such a mess of everything. I chose her over my own family. I defended her when she hurt all of you. How can you ever forgive me? You're my brother, I said simply. There's nothing to forgive. You were being manipulated by someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Over the next 2 days, Jackson stayed with us, reconnecting with Abigail and the kids. Liam was understandably wary at first, but Emma's natural friendliness soon broke the ice. By the evening before Thanksgiving, my brother was helping the kids make paper turkeys for the table decorations, laughing for what seemed like the first time in years. We learned that Tiffany's pregnancy claim was, as suspected, entirely fabricated. We also discovered that she had maxed out 3 of Jackson's credit cards and taken out a loan in his name for a business opportunity that never materialized. The healing would take time both financially and emotionally, but at least it could begin. Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and cold. We arrived at my parents' house to find my grandmother already directing operations from her kitchen chair. My mother happily following her instructions for the perfect gravy consistency. My father and Jackson were watching the Detroit Lions pre-game show, arguing good-naturedly about point spreads. The kids immediately ran to the basement to play. It was as if a dark cloud had lifted from our family. We ate dinner at exactly 2 o'clock, held hands for grace, and each shared something we were genuinely thankful for. Jackson, when his turn came, simply said, I'm thankful for second chances and for a family who loves me enough to tell me hard truths. After dinner, as we gathered for the ornament-making tradition, my grandmother pulled me aside. I'm proud of you, Hans, she said quietly. It takes courage to stand firm when it would be easier to give in. Your grandfather would be proud too. Looking around at my family, imperfect, occasionally frustrating, but bound by genuine love, I knew I had made the right decision. Sometimes being the bad guy means being strong enough to protect what matters most. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect your family? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it is okay to set boundaries even with family. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the most loving thing we can do is say no to toxic behavior.